Up next, we have Jason Sandys, our own Catapult Systems. Jason Sandys here from San Antonio, Texas. I'm going to go really short on this one and just let you get hooked up and get you going on your stuff that you want to do. But Jason, obviously, if you follow the configuration manager areas and the rest of it, is pretty well known in the community. Does a whole lot of blogging, a lot of good, interesting stuff out there. His information is here right now, and I'm sure we're going to get another round of excellent configuration manager info. So thank you, Jason. Woohoo!
Check.
All right, so he actually gave me permission to give him grief. That's good.
Perfect.
Hold on a second. All right, so for Jason, you need to understand that he is a huge, huge Microsoft advocate. That this is pretty much his lifeblood is Microsoft. So on many, many a discussion thread, we have heard things from him expressing his lack of appreciation for non-Microsoft-based products. So for Jason, for System Center Universe, the gift is an apple, which you can sign so that everyone knows that you have actually been in possession of the fruit.
It's not real.
I know it's not real. That way you get to sign it and it stays. So that's for Jason and his love of the Apple product line.
Yay. So how many of you own fruity products by choice? How many of you have them because your wife has one in your house? Yeah, that's why I have one, unfortunately. The wife wanted an iPad, and the daughter wanted an iPhone for Christmas. It was just not a fun time. All right, so bonus, my VMs are all up and running. Of course, that's not the right logon. So let's go change that. And then I will show you some slides. Are y'all want to see a lot more slides today? Like 30, 40 of them? You think that'd be a good thing? Okay, so I think I have like 19 slides, but I'm going to hopefully fly through them as fast as I can and actually get to the demos. Am I starting on time? Am I allowed to start early, Emily? Cool. Kaylee said that I'm allowed to start on time. So Cameron gave me the quick introduction. Obviously, I don't have my name up on the slide or anything. But I've been working in Config Manager for, I don't know, a long time. It seems like decades. It's been around for decades. I don't think I've been working on it nearly as long as Wally has. I don't think there's very many people who have done that. But it's been a long time, and it's part of my blood and potentially part of my DNA even now. So what we're going to talk about is a topic that doesn't come up too often. You'll probably have heard Sherry Kissinger talk about this one quite often. And so it's one that I end up doing a lot of customers. So it makes a lot of sense for me to talk about it. But it's really about getting custom data into Config Manager. It comes up on the forums a lot too. And so we're going to talk about a quick few things here. So like I said, I'm not going to dwell on these slides too much. Core skills. Did anyone show any Vbscript today? Did I see anyone show that? I don't think I saw anything. So is that should be a clue to everyone who doesn't know PowerShell. Go learn PowerShell. There's a reason that everyone's using PowerShell and no one's using Vbscript anymore. And I'll actually show you a little bit of Vbscript because everything we do can be done with Vbscript, but I'm going to mainly say in PowerShell when I do actually drop down. So some other things, WMI, our friend WMI. How many of you think WMI is your friend? No, not so much? You like it? Okay, so WMI is a big piece of this, right? So when we talk about data in Config Manager, this is the thing I've said before. Config Manager is basically a big WMI automation machine. So you need to know WMI, you need to know the ins and outs of WMI, and you need to know how Config Manager leverages WMI. So that's going to be another piece. Not really going to talk about the SSRS piece there, but that's reporting, right? We've got to be able to get the data out. We've got to be able to show it to our bosses. right? How many of you have wonderful bosses that come to you and ask for different data? Get that out of there. That's a normal thing, right? So lots of little different things. I think that's one of the reasons I've always loved config managers so much, is because you're not stuck in one little thing that you know, you're not the DNS guy, right? The DNS guy, how many jobs can the DNS guy actually have and do? Not very many. And you're not the exchange guy. You're not that guy that, for some reason didn't get the spam mail or he got the spam mail delivered. But with config manager, you got to learn a lot of different things. You've got to know about all these other things. And so that's why there's a lot of different things on this chart, obviously. So the first thing to know about getting custom data into config manager is that config manager is not a CMDB. So how many of you are ITIL certified or do ITIL stuff? A couple of y'all. So you know a little bit about CMDB, right? It's a central database for you to store all of your configuration information about anything in your enterprise. That's not config manager, right? Config manager is an OS management system. It's not about storing data. It's about inventorying data, collecting and using that specific data. But in the long run, it's not about telling me what patches did I deploy 3 years ago, what little switch was changed on this system 3 years ago, right? All those wonderful things that do go into a CMDB. Of course, we have that nice overlap in name, configuration, so a lot of people have mixed that up over the years. And of course, for a long time, most people didn't have a centralized infrastructure database anywhere in their environment. So config manager was there, and they kind of leveraged it, or they at least wanted to leverage it. But at the end of the day, right, it's not a CMDB. It's not somewhere that you should be throwing any and all data that you have in your enterprise. So some quick criteria, right? What does the config manager database have? Like I said, inventory, compliance, status, things that we're going to tell essentially in near real time, right? Config manager is not a real-time system. In near real time, we're going to show those, or we're going to gather that kind of stuff and have it available in the config manager DB. All this other stuff on the other side is not necessarily config manager stuff, right? I think this is like my one and only animation. There we go. So those things go into our CMDB. We want to be able to get to those things for historic purposes, for correlation purposes, for reporting, for lots of other things, right? Because there's other things that go on in our enterprise. But all those other things, ownership, tracking, process, right? That ugly process word that all the ITIL people seem to love, for good reason. That stuff's not going to live well in the config manager DB. And of course, you're going to hear from a lot of people, and this is rightly so, right? Microsoft doesn't support you messing with the config manager DB directly. So don't do it, right? Don't add things in there unless you really, really know what you're doing, and you're someone like John Nelson, right? So there are ways to do it, and there are good ways to do it, and we're going to go through a couple of the really good supported ways to do it. So kind of that's a faded slide, and so, wow, it's really faded in here. I should have changed the color on that. But kind of along the same lines as the last one, what should we store, what shouldn't we store? So things that are easy to inventory, things we can easily pick up from the OS, go ahead and store that. Don't try to drag information in from other systems. So if you have, some random ITIL system out there, ticketing system, don't try to drag that information into config manager. Write your reports so that they either combine the data or get the information out of config manager and put it in that CMDB that ticketing software actually has. Don't put a lot of data in the CMDB, or the config manager DB. So how many of you with larger enterprises have really large databases? People get really surprised on how big the config manager database itself can get. So now if you're adding extra information in there, you've got extra overhead, extra things to worry about. And of course, if that information somehow trickled down to the clients, or you're gathering it from the clients, now you've added network load, storage load, lots of things, right, that you didn't plan on having initially. So essentially, if it's not something that's part of the OS, it's not something that's easy to directly query from the OS, don't even really think about putting it in the config manager database. So how do we do this? A few ways we can actually do this, and there's actually kind of a fourth way that I didn't list up here. But we can pull stuff directly from our clients, right? Our WMI repository, essentially, so that's hardware inventory. Everyone knows the kind of weird naming. Hardware inventory really isn't hardware inventory, it's really a WMI inventory for config manager. So anything and everything in the WMI repository is essentially fair game for hardware inventory. So that's going to be our #1 way to do it. We can also use MIF files. MIF files are essentially the same thing if you start going back to the specs and the roots of what WMI actually is, but it's actually you crafting a file that you set on a client that config manager will pick up. I don't think they've actually changed any of that functionality since SMS 2.0. It's essentially just picking that file up and importing it. But there's some pros and cons for doing that, and that's the next slide. Last, we can use push. So we can actually push information directly into the config manager database. This is what discovery does. So we all have used Active Directory System Discovery, Group Discovery. There's a couple of other discoveries in there. So there's ways actually to push that information directly into config manager, and there's some really cool reasons to do that. The client I'm working with right now has an awesome example of that. I'll hold off onto that a little bit at the end. I'll talk about it, but that's also going to be the part 2 that Megan mentioned before. So I won't talk about that one too much. So the fourth way is compliance settings. It's another way we can gather data from our clients and put information about that data into the database. However, we can't use compliance settings to say what value is X. We can only use compliance settings to say, is value X equal to? And then we get a yay or nay, right? We're not going to get what that actual value is. So if all you need is a thumbs up or a thumbs down, compliance settings is great for that. But if you actually need to know what the value is for reporting, for whatever reasons, then compliance settings doesn't come in. So that's why I didn't really include it in this at all. Okay, oh, that was another transition, sorry. More or less, I just kind of replaced the hardware inventory and the discovery as what the push and the pull actually were. I almost missed that myself. So here's my little chart, kind of when to use each of these things. Basically, the 2 MIF types, I won't talk about them a whole lot, but one of them adds an ID to the file. One of them doesn't add an ID to the file, so we can actually create new things that have nothing to do with any of the resources within Config Manager itself. They have some interesting little problems, though. So the file base is one of them. You're actually managing files all by yourself, right? You're having to drop these files somewhere in the file system of the clients. You're having to make sure that they're updated, delete them if they're not necessary, control their size, make sure they're accurate syntax-wise. So that's on there somewhere, the syntax typo sensitive. And the validated is an interesting one, too. So I found a couple of nuggets in some PFE articles out there that you can actually put information into a MOF. It's not validated by Config Manager at all, and actually overwrite information in the Config Manager database. So that could really cause some problems if you haven't gone through the pains of making sure that what you have is validated. The typo sensitive, it's just a text file that has a special format at the end of the day. So yeah, we deal with XML files, but there's ways to validate XML files. These don't really have a validator. So if you have just a typo in there, now your whole inventory process can come to a halt because of that. So typically, the MIFs are something to stay away from. And everything we can do with the MIF, we can do straight with WMI. So that's definitely the one to always stick with. So how do we get data into WMI? Or how do we get hardware inventory to get data, right? It's always going to be coming from WMI. We have our easy button solution, and that's, like I just said, coming straight from WMI. Our kind of sort of easy button is registry, right? Almost, I won't say almost everything. A lot of things are in WMI. How many of you have explored the WMI repository on a Windows system? Played around, looked around. So we'll look at a couple of those in a minute here too. So a lot of stuff's good, a lot of good stuff is in there, and it's pretty easy to pull that information out. But the other main place that configuration information, any generic information about a lot of things on Windows, of course, is the registry. So we want to be able to pull information out of there. It's the kind of sort of easy button. And then the last one that's maybe not so easy, depending upon your skills, although we'll see it actually is pretty easy to do, is user input, right? So I've got a really good example for that one. And then things that just totally aren't WMI, right? I want to get a folder size. I want to look at the user's profile size on this system. I want to estimate how much USMT will take up and pull that kind of information back, right? Running those processes so that we gather that information directly from those systems. All right. Hopefully I went through those pretty quickly. And we'll get on with some of the demos. Oh, it went to 2 screens on me, didn't it? There we go. Okay, so we're going to start off with kind of that easy demo piece, right? So built into Config Manager 2012 is the ability to just simply add anything from WMI. So some easy ways or some easy ones to add are directly in our client settings here, and we go to our hardware inventory, and I will zoom it hopefully fairly liberally in a minute here. It gives us this nice little browser. And all of these essentially correspond to just about every WMI class that you can think of within the Windows repository. So one common one that a lot of folks want to put in here is additional information about updates. So there's a nice one that's already included in here. It's called Quick Fix Engineering. And you can see in parentheses is the actual name of the WMI class, Win32 Quick Fix Engineering. So for any of these that are actually in here, and I'll clear my search, you can see all the parentheses actually have that WMI class name in there. If we just go out and search our friend, Bing, he will take us to our other friend of MSDN, and we can actually see exactly what's in that class. So it'll give us a nice little description. Sometimes these descriptions are in programmer speak or kind of dev speak, so you have to do a little bit of interpretation on occasion. But once you get in here, you can kind of see exactly what that class has and the information that that class is going to have in it so that we can pull it back. And each of these fields has a description also. So we can read. Caption is going to be pretty self-explanatory description, right? But then we get into hotfix ID. Depending upon the class, it may not be so obvious exactly what's in there. So it's a really good resource to always go into MSDN and go look up exactly what's going to be there. So if I want to add Quick Fix Engineering, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to add this at the top level. Right? Here's all those attributes that we just saw on MSDN. And I'm just going to go ahead and say OK there. And that's now going to add it. But there are other possibilities of things to add to inventory from our WMI repository. So I'm going to come down and click the Add button at the bottom. And I'm going to go to a completely different namespace. I'm going to connect to a client. Now, by default, the root namespace or the core namespace is SimV2. We're actually going to go to CCM, which most people will maybe recognize as related to SCCM, even though it's not called SCCM. And that is for ConfigMgr. So we're going to go to CCM Software Management. Pretty basic. It's going to connect over to my workstation. And now I'm going to be able to browse all the classes within that namespace. These are actually relatively undocumented, so we're not going to be able to go to MSDN and find these. But you're going to find a lot of other folks out there that have documented what's in here, or they're relatively obvious to see what's in them also. We're going to go ahead and select the top two, the cache config and the cache info. And now those are going to get added. You saw a quick scroll bar that went across there. And they're going to get added to my inventory also. We can do our drop-down arrows, and we can see all of the different information that is actually available in those classes. We don't really need everything in here. So I'll uncheck a few. I won't go through the bottom one and go through that one. But now that's going to add it to our hardware inventory. And the next time that client pulls policy, he's going to have that information added or to his local policy so that he can now report that information back up through hardware inventory. So let's go ahead and do that. I've added that to my default client settings. I could have added it to a lower one. You see I have my workstation settings here. Be a little bit careful when you do that. You always have to, if I'm going to add a new class, come up to my default. So just like I did, I added those cache info ones there. I have to go to the default and add it there first. I don't actually have to select it. So if I go back in there and show you that. So there's my cache. Let me actually do a search. And kind of like I only selected a couple of options there under cache config, if I don't select it here, I can actually go to a lower priority client settings and select it there. So if I only want the cache config to be collected on my workstation or my workstations, then I can go to that workstation policy and select it there. But I have to add it at the default first for ConfigMgr to even understand that I want that to be done. Now the reason to do that is it's going to now add it to SQL Server. So I'm going to pull up our wonderful other friend, Trace32, and we'll scroll up a few here because it happened a little bit ago. And notice what it did. So it actually created a SQL Server view for that new information. So our cache config are actually our two classes here. And if we actually go into SQL Server itself, we can see it creating those two views. Let me refresh my view table. And scroll down to SQL Server. And here's our new two. I didn't show you before and after, so you'll have to take my word for it. But these two just got created, the cache config and the cache info EX. And if I query them right now, they're not going to have any data in there, right? These are brand new, so kind of a reinforcement. These are actually brand new things that just got added. And notice there's a GS in front of them also. I honestly have no idea what the historical significance of the GS is, but that's our active inventory. That's what actually just came from those clients right now. You'll also notice if you go down and scroll down in the views within our database, there's an HS. Now that one's pretty clear. It stands for history. So essentially, anytime there's a change that comes in, and notice we have an HS cache config here also and a cache info EX. So anytime a change comes in for data, the old data actually gets moved to HS first. That way we have our history. And the current data stays in GS. That way we never even have to worry about doing any of the historical stuff ourselves. Config Manager is automatically going to take care of that. So we're always going to be able to see and report on those changes. So if we hop over to our client here, like I said, we got to run our machine policy first, right? We made a policy change. So we have to let the agent know about that policy change first, and then we can run our hardware inventory to actually see that. So let's make sure our policy change happened. Usually it's quite quick, but every now and then weird things happen. So that looked like that one just happened. And if we go into, oh, that happened, so let's run our hardware inventory now. Now the client knows that we have more information that we need to pick up. So we're going to go ahead and run our hardware inventory. And there's that's our policy evaluator. We'll go to the other log now, the inventory agent. We can see that that one's just kicking off. And it'll take, depends upon the client, right? Seen it go by really quick, seen it go by a little bit slow. So usually about a minute or so, nothing more. Now you're going to see some yellows, you're going to see some reds, because the default policy for Config Manager actually includes things that that client doesn't have on it. So nothing to worry about there, right? That's definitely nothing to see here. Just unless there's something explicit that you added, then you want to definitely check it out. So if we do a quick find here and we look for cache, and I'll show you the bottom there. There's our software agent namespace. Let me actually underline that we just added. And so now we can see that information is actually in there. So we can see any and every class that actually got inventoried by that agent. Now we can't see any of the data that it pulled back. So if you actually need to troubleshoot the data, there's another step that you can actually take there. Oh, the one thing to show is near the bottom here. There it is. Nice little line that says, look, inventory temp report. Great. It's a nice XML file. We all know Config Manager uses XML a lot. Well, maybe my inventory information's in there. And lo and behold, we go to our temp location. And these are old files. You can see the time hacks on there. Those are definitely not from today. So unfortunately, that file gets deleted, so we can't actually go in there. But luckily, I'm sure while they were troubleshooting this, they came up with a nice little thing that we could do. If we create a file in there, doesn't matter what's in the file, blank file, as long as it's called archive_reports.sms in this directory, so that's CCM inventory temp. Now it will archive, and that's where the other files that are in there, because during my testing, that's what I was actually doing. And so now if I kick off another hardware inventory cycle, we'll of course have to wait for it to spin through, which will take another minute or so. Now it'll create that file in there. Something you don't want to turn on all your agents, for sure, because those files could get big and you're going to fill up disk space for sure. Almost done. Almost done. There we go. So we see our temp report popped up again, same location. But if we go back to that directory now, notice we have a new XML file in there. Because of permissions, I can't open it in place. I'll copy it to the desktop. Go ahead and double click on him. And we can actually browse through all the information they just got put in that XML. That XML is actually what got submitted directly to the management point, or at least the information directly in there got submitted. So this is exactly what gets fed up for a hardware inventory cycle. Now notice there's not really a whole lot of information in this specific XML file. And if we look, it's only 1 KB. Anyone know why that one's so small? Anybody? Delta. Someone said delta in the back, and that's exactly the answer. So if I do a quick zoom in here, notice the one right under it is about 891K, just under a meg. That was a full that I forced probably earlier today. And so if I open that one up, I'm going to have all the information in there. But as hopefully everyone knows, everyone past that first full, or if there's some weird issue, it'll run a full again. But everyone after that is just a delta as far as the inventories go. As you can see in this case, that delta was 1K. It's typically not that small. The ones I was doing, because of recently used apps that are in there, we're using around 40 or 50K. But it's definitely not that meg. So great troubleshooting tool, so you can actually see exactly what data is in there, particularly when you're adding custom data to hardware inventory. We can see exactly what goes back up. So if we go back over to our ConfigMgr server now, and we go to our actual views, as long as everything got submitted correctly, which I have no doubt that it did. Have any demos blown up today? None? Okay. Well, hopefully I'm not going to be the first. So there's our information. Granted, it's only one client. He submitted his information, and this is strictly about the cache. All right, so this is a great way to get cache information. Right, a lot of times people are, how big are my caches out in the field? How do I know what's out there? This is a great way to get it for the ConfigMgr client itself. The other one that I added was the Cache Info EX. So that one actually tells you what's cached on the local client. Let me get rid of the properties over here and we can see a little bit more information. We can see our content ID. So you have to correlate the content ID because they were actually a couple of applications. But if you ever have any questions about what content is actually cached in your environment, let's say you're rolling Office out to your environment, and you need to, of course, make sure that Office is out there before go live date. Right? Go live date is 2 months down the line. We're going to distribute the content, make sure it's all out there. Maybe we're even going to flip the flag to make it persistent in the cache. Well, I want to make sure that it's out there so the clients have access to it when they do it, no matter where they are. Right? If they're connected to the corporate network or not, whether they're on IBCM or not, doesn't matter. We want to make sure it's there. Well, now we can actually inventory that information, and we can run a report off of that information also to make sure it's out there and be sure that it's out there before go live date. Okay, so that was definitely the easy button as far as what content, right? Anything in WMI is essentially what it was. There's a nice little browser they built in, and we can get to that information quite quickly without having to do a whole lot of work, right? I mean, is there anyone in your organization that you wouldn't trust to do that? Maybe a secretary, right? But just about everyone else in your IT org, pretty easy to do. But not everything's in WMI, unfortunately. A lot of things are in the registry. So enter a community tool that Kent did not demo this morning called regkeytomoff. So it's kind of a weird shaped window. Let me maximize. So regkeytomoff was mainly put together by a guy by the name of Mark Cochran. He had a lot of other community help, including Sherry Kissinger. Essentially what regkeytomoff does is we can go in and choose any registry key that we want. It's got a nice little browser. I'm actually on my client. I'll do a quick zoom in, although there's not really much to show on this one. So I'm actually going to pick the key for my ConfigMgr startup script, which just has a couple of values in it, a last run, the log location, and the last execution result. And what it's going to do is it's going to actually generate some code that we put into a MOF file. And I'll talk about those in a second as I get to it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this code. I'm not going to copy it all because they're actually doing a couple of advanced things in here. And you'll see that really quick. It's really small. It'll be bigger on the other screen. So this file is called configuration.mof. And I'm going to scroll all the way down to the end. Does it look big enough up there? I think it does. And it looks like I didn't delete it from before, which is OK. This is exactly what I just copied. And essentially, what happens in configuration.mof is this file tells a WMI repository what to do. So we're not specifically storing data, although we can store data with configuration.mof. But we're typically creating classes. We sometimes create namespaces within WMI itself, and we're doing that all in configuration.mof. Now, this doesn't tell ConfigMgr to do anything. Right? We tell ConfigMgr to pick up data by doing the editor like I did before. Now behind the scenes, some people remember there was a file called smsdef.mof. That file is essentially gone. It's part of the database now, and that editor that we were using before, that I showed before, that GUI editor, actually is creating and updating those values directly in the database. So we don't have to modify that file at all. But we do have configuration.mof, and it's interesting if you actually look through configuration.mof. This is default except for what I just pasted in that was left over. There's a lot of other things that ConfigMgr by default is doing. So we have our Win32 Reg SMS Advanced Client ports, right? Pretty self-explanatory what that one's doing. So the Config Manager product itself is actually taking advantage of configuration.mof to do things. So if we look through this real quick, and I don't have too much time to go into real details, but essentially we're using our normal namespace, our root simv2. It's telling it to do that. We're going to delete any other old instances that we have of this class. We're going to define some properties. And then we're going to tell it where to pull these properties from. So in this case, it's actually using something called a provider. So this is the registry provider. So WMI is essentially querying the registry for us. So going back to the opening statement, everything's still coming through WMI. Even though it's in the registry, it's going to come through WMI. Now, a really cool part about this is that it's actually dynamic. So if we go and we actually directly query WMI right now, let me go back to my workstation. And here's that actual field, the config manager startup directly in regedit there. But if we actually go and initially query that, so I'm going to use our friend PowerShell. That's it. We can see not the prettiest of output, but it's definitely good enough for most uses. We can see the key name. Doesn't really matter as long as it's unique. But we can see our last execution result succeeded, and here's the time. And of course, this all came directly from the registry. But like I said, this was actually dynamic. So if I actually go change this value directly in the registry right now, we'll call it, I don't know, I'll just put an X on there. It doesn't really matter what it is. And I do that query immediately again. I don't have to do anything different. And you can see right there that we have our succeeded X in there. So it's not like it's something static. It's not like we have to wait for anything to actually happen. It's going to happen in real time. We're going to query the registry. So whoever queries WMI, whether it's Config Manager or whether it's PowerShell, as we saw here, that change is going to be immediately available. So that we add to configuration.mof. Now, like I said, that doesn't tell Config Manager to pull that data back. We still have to go in and do exactly what I just did for the other two keys. So if I come in here to my client settings and go to hardware inventory, and we do our add, we connect to our namespace. At this point, it's only on my client. That's not the name. And sometimes this stalls out too. This could be the Houston weather because I'd never seen it stalled out, kind of like Wally's did before. We'll try it one more time. I don't know why it was doing this. There it goes. Weird. And there's that class that was actually there. Now the piece that I didn't show you about configuration.mof is that it's actually a file sitting on our site server itself. If we go to my actual client installation directory, which is on the E drive, and we go into program files, and we go to inboxes, there's a CLI files.src, and we go into HINV, there's our wonderful configuration.mof file. So I'm directly editing that file. That's probably a little bit dangerous for most folks. They don't want to directly edit it. Make a copy of it first, and then edit it. Because once you save that file, Configuration Manager will actually try to compile it. So we can actually come into our data loader log, the same log that we looked at before where it created the classes. And if I can find it real quick, which I probably can't right now, there will be a line in here specifically that says mofcomp. So let's use our find tool. There we go. Running mofcomp on that file. So anytime you save it, Config Manager is going to see that that file's changed. It's going to run mofcomp. That's going to change it essentially into a policy that Config Manager can now deliver to the clients. And then it will convert that back into WMI on the clients. It will only do that once you change mofcomp, or once you change configuration.mof. So if you never change configuration.mof again, it will never add that information to any clients. So it's not something that's ongoing. That's why typically configuration.mof is something for static type data or implementing a registry provider, just like we saw. It's not about getting data into WMI itself. That's really where the SMS def mof is about, and WMI. So what do we do if we have other data, right? That was the kind of the sort of easy case. Thanks to Mark, it's really not even that big of a deal anymore. We use regkey to moff. We have our little moff file. We copy paste. We're off and running, and thanks to the nice little wizard in 2012, we don't really even have to edit any other files, and that stuff's there. But what if we have other data that's somewhere else? Who knows what it actually could be? Let me go ahead and cancel all these. So on our client, we'll just fictionally create up something totally random. And I'm not about to type all this out, so I'm going to copy it all. The first thing we need to do is we need to have another namespace. Now, as you saw when we used regkey to moff, we actually use root/simv2. That's the default namespace that a lot of things use. But I'm a big proponent of if you're doing custom things, create custom things, right? So that you know your data is yours, that you're not corrupting anybody else's stuff. There's no possibility of any ambiguity or stepping on anybody ultimately. So in this case, I'm going to create a namespace called SCU. And so here's some wonderful PowerShell code. I'll ultimately post this, but kind of like Pete was alluding to before, I didn't invent this code, right? I essentially went and found someone else that had figured out how to do this and copied and pasted it just like I did right there. Now the reason I didn't use SCU though for the reg provider, for the regkey to moff, is because it won't work. It took me a while to figure that one out initially, but it won't work. The registry provider that's registered will only use the SimV2. There's another one that it will actually use also, but using the SimV2 is usually the way to go. So in this case, I went ahead and I created another namespace, our SCU namespace. I'm going to create a custom class also. More PowerShell code. This class is called user data class. And then finally, I'm going to populate that class with data. Right, in this case, this is totally fictional example ultimately. So you're going to have to go back and you have to figure out, well, what data do I want to collect? Right, that's kind of the first step. So manager comes to me and says, I need to know how big this folder is on every system. Great. Okay, so what are the data items, right? It's really a development exercise. You have to start from that perspective so that you can define these things. The namespace is easy. You're just picking a name. Pick a common name that you're going to use for other things in your environment. The class should line up with whatever it is. So folder size, great. We're going to create a class called folder size. Okay, what data items do we actually want to store? So that's where we created the different properties for each of the class, for the class that's in here. And then we need to put the data there. Well, how do I get that data? I don't know. It depends upon exactly what that is. And I'll show you a more real-world example here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and copy our last piece here. I think I already copied that to the clipboard, but let's make sure. And it's going to populate that data in that class now. So if I actually use PowerShell and I remember all of the things I put in. So we have our namespace. Remember, our custom namespace is named SCU now. We have our class, which is called user data class. No idea why I picked that. And there's the data that we actually put in. So I didn't do this query explicitly for the cache config. I could have. Actually, let's go ahead and do that real quick, just to show you that the data is there. Actually, it wasn't in CMV2, CCM, softmgmt agent. And it was called cache config, I believe. I spelled cache right. There was the data that we pulled back before. So same, right? Exactly the same thing that I did before with essentially something that was pre-created for us by ConfigMgr. Well, I just went through and a handful of lines of code and created a custom namespace class, and I populated it with data. Now, the data is bogus, like we said. But now it's in WMI. I can collect it now, just like I did before. So I can hop back into ConfigMgr. I can go into my client settings, and I can go down and define it exactly the way it was, and now I can have all that data coming back. So onto a more real-world example, the one I've kind of alluded to a couple of times. And here's my Vbscript. So this definitely wasn't PowerShell. I think it was just easier to find some of the code at the time. Essentially, this is exactly what I said, or the example I gave is a customer I was at said, we want to know how big this folder is. So the backstory, of course, is they had a custom folder for all their user data. And they were migrating from XP to 7 and wanted to go to the normal profile. So how much data is actually out there? We don't know. We don't know how big of an issue this is actually going to be. So came up with this nice little script. We can put in any folder that we want that's on that drive. And I'm highlighting, and that probably doesn't mean anything. So essentially, it's an array. We put in any folder that we want. A bunch of random folders for the example that I put in there. It's going to go ahead and look for the namespace. Now, at the top here, I have a nice little piece in the script. We can define whatever namespace that we want. So in this case, I was calling it IT local. We can have the class that we want. And it won't recreate those if those already exist, of course. From there, it's just going to get the data. It's going to loop through each one of those folders, and it's going to store it in WMI. Once it's in WMI, now I can go back to my client settings in the hardware, in the hardware inventory, just like I did a handful of times already, and my information's there. So let me go ahead and run this script. If I can. Weird refresh issue. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to run this script on this box itself. And just to prove to you another little piece here, so we'll do our git WMI. What did I spell wrong? Oh, I have no idea what I spelled wrong. Can anyone see what I spelled wrong? Yep, that's all right. That's exactly what it needs to be. Oh, there we go. I didn't put the dash in front of class. There we go. So those are all the namespaces that are currently on my system. We can see the SCU one that I created a little bit earlier, but there's no IT local one right now. So I'm going to go ahead and run that script. I love stuff folders. Of course, I shouldn't have done that. Nope. There it is. All right. And I still have a Vbscript echo in there, so an echo so we can actually see what was there. And now if I go back to my namespace query that is working, notice there at the bottom we have our IT local, so it created the namespace for us. And if I actually query that data, IT local, I did it again. I think it was called folder size. No, what did I call it? Oh, I spelled size wrong. My keyboarding skills could use some work, right? There we go. So there's that data. Now, granted, all those folders didn't exist on this system, but now I have that data in WMI. And I think I've said that a few times, right, already. Once I have it in WMI, it's really easy for us to get it now in ConfigMgr. I just go back into my client settings, and I actually add it there. Now, another really interesting thing here, or something to take note of, is when you no longer need the data, come back in here and delete it. Right? Kind of going back to that initial talk about let's not bloat our database, let's not increase our backup size, let's not increase the size that's taking up on the clients. There's all kinds of pieces there. Clean up that data. So if I no longer need my cache config data, come in here and hit delete. And now if we actually watch the log file, we won't watch it too intently, but this is the data loader log file. It'll actually say, and I think it just scrolled through there, there we go, dropping schema for inventory. So if we went back into SQL Server right now, that view's gone, which means all that data that was behind there is gone. Really, the view pointed to the table. I didn't show you the table, but the table's gone now, and so is all that data behind there. So now we've decreased the size of our database, and we've maintained things as best as we can. So pretty easy once we get into WMI to do all these different things. Now, you know, for folder size, pretty easy to actually get that if you actually looked at the code. But there's always a little bit of an exercise in there of figuring out exactly how do I get that information. But once you've figured out how to get the information, store it in WMI and you're good to go. So what do you actually do if you have user information? So here's a common one. I have lots of servers. I don't control them. The administrators always yell at me because I reboot them for software updates. Great, I can use maintenance windows, but who knows what time they actually allow me to reboot their servers. So we can pop up a nice little user interface. There we go. So this is a tool I created called OSD++. It's actually targeted OSD, of course. But as I was coming up with a concept for this, I'm like, this is perfect for this. And I've heard of other folks using ugly HTAs. I'm an HTA hater. I like pretty things. So this is a nice little interface that we can come into, and we can type in whatever we need to type in here. So this is the primary administrator, whatever application that they're maintaining on this system. Now they can actually pick what maintenance window they want as an administrator, right? We can advertise this out through packages and programs, so any administrator on that system can run it. Once they choose their maintenance window, it stores it in the registry, or it stores it in WMI, and the application will actually do that for you. Almost out of time, so I can't show you that explicitly. And now we can pick that up through ConfigMgr, and now we can write a query that populates our collections to do that kind of thing. So lots of flexibility once we have a tool like that. Anything we can get into WMI, we can ultimately inventory. And I just ran out of time, but that's why there is a part 2 to this. Let me go back to the slides, and I skipped some slides for you guys, so hopefully you guys appreciate that. I do. The part 2, and Megan mentioned this before, is part of the Secunia We Speak Geek series. So I'm going to dive down into some of these concepts a little bit more, some a little more advanced pieces that you can actually have in there. But at the end of the day, really, as long as you know a little bit about WMI and you're not afraid of things, you know, I said it a handful of times, that UI makes things really easy. Get the data into WMI, and ConfigMgr will collect it for you and do all the hard work. And that's fun with adding custom data.